why OSHA? So in the late 1960s and 70s, they estimated about 14,000 workers were killed on the job per year. Again, that was a simple estimate. It was probably higher than that. There was an economic boom in the 60s that really caused that number to go up. And even in the early, turn of the century, in the early steel mills, the early refineries, and other places, there were lots of people dying just in the way that they worked and the hours they worked and everything else. But in the late 60s, in that time frame, there was a huge boom in the industrial complex, and we started to see bunches of injuries. That averaged out to about 38 workers per day, and it started to rival the Vietnam numbers for deaths in the Vietnam War, which really started to get people's attention. As we look at that today, we're looking at about 4,340 workers in 2009. And about 7.2 million work sites, and we've gone from 11 per 100 workers in 1972 with serious injuries or illnesses on the job to about 3.6 per 100 in 2009. So it's obviously made a difference on some of the things that they've done and some of the things they've been able to institute. So if we look at the basis of OSHA is what they call the general duty clause. That's the employer's responsibility. It's divided into two sections there. It shall provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that cause or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees, and that the employer shall comply with the occupational safety and health standards under the Act. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but that's what OSHA cited for the tank farm 2 fire, correct?
The general duty clause, yes.
Yeah. So that's also what they call the catch-all. So if there's not a standard that you violated, they can come back and cite you for this. And if they want to, come back and get you. It's not a walking and working service violation. It's not a fall protection, a lockout, tagout. They can come back and get you with this general duty clause. So that's, but this is the bare bones basis of OSHA, is to put that responsibility on the employer. Its task is to protect the worker, create standards, and record work-related injuries and illnesses. And typically, we're talking more of the serious illnesses and injuries as opposed to the minor ones. And we'll break that down. And they do that with the OSHA 300 log. When we talk about injury classifications for OSHA, we basically divide it into two categories or two classifications: first aid and recordable. And we can break down in the recordable even more into lost time injuries and fatalities. So first aid injuries. Some of these are kind of important because it's something we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. But that top one is probably the most difficult for healthcare providers on the job to mandate. So use of non-prescription med and non-prescription strength when the med exists in both forms. The most common one for that is going to be ibuprofen. So Motrin 800 milligrams is the prescription strength of Motrin. Typically, if we administer that or somebody administers that in the workplace, they're going to give you 200 milligram packets of two in each pack. So you give 2 packs to somebody that's 800 milligrams, you get them a prescription strength. That makes it a recordable injury if you're giving up prescription. So that's probably the most difficult one for people to understand or to get. So if I give 4 packs to somebody, I got to tell them to take 3 of those pills, not 4. If I tell them to take 4, then I've made that a recordable injury and caused that injury or that injury or illness to go on the 300 log. Tetanus immunizations is another one, so that's what they call a prophylactic, and we'll talk about that one here in a couple of minutes. And the rest of these, if anybody has any questions, I don't want to read through the slide completely, but basically, if your mom, your spouse, your brother, sister or your 18-year-old daughter who's going to be a nurse can't do something for you and treat that, that makes it a first aid injury. If it goes something past that, then it's going to go into the recordable category. When we talk about recordables, we'll kind of go from least to most severe, as you can probably tell from the way the slide's laid out. Any work-related injury or illness that requires medical treatment beyond basic first aid. So just what I said before there, if somebody that's not medically trained can't treat you for it, then it's going to be categorized as a recordable injury. When we get into cancers, reversible diseases, fractured or cracked bones or teeth, and punctured eardrums, any of those. This is another big one, is any result of loss of consciousness, no matter how long. If the person said they lost consciousness, that automatically makes it a recordable injury. So getting that information is important, and talking to bystanders, and that's good information to get for the G1, for Kevin, or for Scott, or for the medical people coming on, so they can make the proper notifications and the proper documentation on that. Any injury or illness that restricts work or transfers to another job. So that's where we get into, we're starting to, somebody is giving those restrictions and or making you do another job. Now, that does not count for the day of the injury. So if something happens and I say, go in the control room and take the rest of the shift off, or do this and not go back out, that's acceptable, but it's going into their next shift of what they can do. And it's really not their next scheduled shift, it's actually the next day. And there were some big changes a few years ago in that, because workplaces were getting around some of these designations by manipulating work schedules for people, so it's actually the next day you have to be able to perform your job. Any work-related injury or illness that results in days away from work, that's what we determine to be lost time, a lost time injury. And if you have an injury and through time it goes back and you lose time, then it reverts back to the day of the injury. So when businesses have notifications of how many injury work-free days or lost time injury-free days, that's going to go back, and that's going to have to adjust your numbers. And of course, anytime we have a work-related fatality, that's going to be a recordable. So some notifications, and again, as the G1 or as the fire marshal, we're not going to be making these notifications, but you have within 8 hours after the death of the employee to notify OSHA, or 8 hours from the time that you have that indication of a fatality, or that you know of a fatality. There could be some time frames of stuff gets lost in the cracks, and you don't get all that information right away, but it's pretty tight to 8 hours once you are aware of that fatality. They're going to give you a little bit of time to investigate, get some information, because they're going to ask you a lot of questions. So they'll give you a little bit of time, but they want that in 20 seconds, in 8 hours. Within 24 hours, for any inpatient hospitalization of one or more employees, or an employee's amputation, or an employee's loss of an eye as a result of a work-related incident. So give you a little bit more time on a hospitalization or some of those other injuries, but you have 24 hours. So again, time is of the essence. The other side of that is we do have an OSHA office in Toledo, and they see something come up on the news, they might pop out right away to come see what's going on, or at least or give you a phone call to decide what's going on. So any questions so far?